Number. Without saying a word, humans leave the Galactic Council, regrets it all. 1 year after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council existed only as a desperate coalition of survivors, huddled in the galaxy's inner core. 3/4 of known space had fallen to the convergent nightmares that humanity had somehow kept at bay for centuries. The elegant Nexus Station, once a symbol of diplomatic cooperation, had been evacuated to a reinforced bunker complex deep within the gravitational well of a neutron star. Chancellor Vexhai, his once proud form now gaunt from stress and sleepless rotations, stood before what remained of the Galactic Assembly. Only 17 species were still represented, down from the original 47. The others had either been consumed by the advancing horrors or had simply vanished when their homeworlds went dark. The last refugee convoy from the Andromeda Reach has been destroyed, he announced, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who had delivered too many such reports. The devourer swarms have reached the Galactic Bridge. We estimate 3 months before they reach the core worlds. Dr. Yilnara's crystalline form was cracked and dim. Her people's colony ships lost somewhere in the chaos that had consumed the outer territories. I have completed my analysis of human combat records from the archives they left behind. The entity classifications alone number in the thousands. They fought things that our combined science cannot even properly describe. 2. She gestured to a holographic display, showing one of the smaller threats, currently ravaging the galaxy. This creature, which has already consumed 17 star systems, is listed in their files as a Class C, moderate threat. They encountered and eliminated dozens of similar entities every year. The revelation sent ripples of despair through the assembled survivors. What they considered an apocalyptic nightmare had been, to the humans, routine pest control. Ambassador Thakar of the Krathan hive mind, his carapace scarred from the evacuation of his species' primary colony, clicked his mandibles with bitter understanding. We never asked what they were protecting us from, because we were afraid to know. We preferred to believe that the galaxy was fundamentally safe, that threats could be managed through diplomacy and reason. The humans knew better, added the machine Concordate's representative, its optical sensors flickering with damage from electromagnetic storms that had followed the reality distortions. They understood that some aspects of the universe are fundamentally hostile to organized life. Their entire civilization was structured around that truth. Trademaster Velkun, his 6 eyes now reduced to 4, after a pirate attack on his refugee fleet, accessed what remained of the economic data networks. I have been analyzing their resource allocation patterns from before their departure. 40% of their total industrial capacity was dedicated to military applications we could not understand. They were fighting a war economy for their entire recorded history. Because they were at war, realized Chancellor Vexhai. Not against other species, but against the fundamental chaos that seeks to unmake everything we have built. They never told us because they knew we would panic, fragment, abandon the very cooperation that made our civilization possible. General Kexatul, commanding what remained of the Zentori defensive fleet, brought up tactical displays that painted a grim picture of their current situation. Our combined forces are down to 12% of pre-crisis strength. The entities approaching the core worlds are beyond anything in our experience. Traditional weapons have no effect. Our ships are destroyed simply by proximity to some of these things. The Melodians, their once serene aquatic representatives now agitated to the point that their tanks required constant chemical treatment to prevent toxic shock, sent desperate harmonics through their communication systems. Is there any possibility of reaching the humans? Any chance they might reconsider their isolation? Dr. Yilnara's response crushed what little hope remained in the chamber. The barriers around the Sol system have become impenetrable. No communication gets through. No probe survives contact with the energy fields. They have effectively removed themselves from the galaxy entirely. Perhaps that was always their plan, suggested Ambassador Zilthara, her bioluminescent patterns now permanently shifted to frequencies of mourning and loss. Perhaps they knew this day would come, and they prepared the ultimate fallback position. The truth of their situation was becoming inescapable. The humans had not simply been another member species of the Galactic Council. They had been the galaxy's immune system, its defenders against cosmic horrors that existed beyond the comfortable boundaries of known space. They had fought a secret war for centuries, bearing the burden alone, while others lived in blissful ignorance. And when they had finally grown tired of being taken for granted, criticized for their vigilance, questioned for their necessary preparations, they had simply walked away. They had not left in anger or revenge. They had left in disappointment, realizing that their fellow civilizations would never understand or appreciate the sacrifices being made on their behalf. The emergency alarms that had become the soundtrack of their existence suddenly changed pitch, shifting to a frequency that none of the survivors recognized. The display screens throughout the bunker complex flickered and stabilized, showing something that made every delegate freeze in shock. A human ship hung in space above the neutron star, its hull gleaming with technologies that had never appeared in any council database. It was massive, larger than most space stations, and it radiated power signatures that made their most advanced vessels look like primitive toys. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Corps," came a voice through speakers that should have been impossible to access from outside the bunker's shielded communications array. "We are transmitting on all frequencies. By order of the Human Emergency Council, the remaining sapient species of this galaxy are hereby placed under human protection. Prepare for immediate evacuation to designated safe zones." Chancellor Vexhai stared at the display in disbelief. "Admiral Chen? But you were just the diplomatic ambassador. How did you—" "I was never just a diplomat, Chancellor," came the reply. And there was something in her voice that spoke of knowledge and experience far beyond what any of them had suspected. "None of us were just anything. We have been preparing for this scenario for over 3 centuries. The evacuation will begin immediately." The display showed additional ships materializing around the neutron star, vessels that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. They moved with purpose and efficiency that spoke of long preparation and desperate necessity. "But the barriers around Sol," began Dr. Yilnara, "were never meant to keep us in," Admiral Chen interrupted. "They were meant to keep everything else out while we completed our preparations. The real war is about to begin." As if summoned by her words, the long-range sensors detected something that made every surviving delegate understand the scope of what humanity had been protecting them from. The entities approaching the core worlds were not the real threat. They were merely the advanced scouts of something far worse, something that existed beyond the boundaries of the known universe itself. "You have 60 hours to evacuate all non-essential personnel from the core worlds," continued Admiral Chen. "Human forces will establish a defensive perimeter around the galactic heart. This will be our final stand." "Final stand?" whispered Chancellor Vexhai. "The cycle ends here," came the grim reply. "Either we break the pattern that has destroyed every previous galactic civilization, or we ensure that nothing survives to threaten whatever civilizations might arise after us. Humanity has made its choice." The truth hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. The humans had not abandoned them out of spite or disappointment. They had withdrawn to prepare for a battle that would determine the fate of not just their galaxy, but every galaxy that might come after. They had spent the past year not in isolation, but in desperate preparation for a war against forces that threatened the very concept of organized life. And despite everything that had happened, despite being dismissed and criticized and taken for granted for centuries, they were still willing to fight that war, not for gratitude or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. As the evacuation ships began to arrive, their technology so advanced that it seemed like magic to the surviving council members, Admiral Chen's voice carried one final message: "You never understood what we were protecting you from, and we never expected you to. That was our burden to bear. But remember this: when the darkness finally comes for everything you hold dear, remember that there were those who stood against it. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. Remember that when all else failed, humanity did not abandon the galaxy. We just stopped asking for permission to save it." The last transmission ended, and the galaxy braced itself for a war that would either end in salvation or ensure that the darkness would spread no further. Humanity had made their choice. Now the universe would learn the true meaning of human determination when everything they had ever sworn to protect hung in the balance.